Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the invisible scaffolding that actually keeps complex systems, especially democracies, from just collapsing under their own weight. We look at these massive, highly competitive systems and assume the rules hold them together. But as we're going to see, the most important load-bearing walls, they're completely invisible.
So let's look at this fundamental paradox. What actually keeps a system stable when the written rules just aren't cutting it? Think about it for a second. Why don't the strongest players in any system just do absolutely everything they're legally allowed to do to win? If there's a loophole right there that practically guarantees victory, why on earth wouldn't you take it?
Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, but honestly, it's incredibly fragile. Democratic stability relies on self-restraint, not just enforcement. The whole survival of the system depends on this shared, unspoken agreement to basically put a cap on how far everyone will push their legal power. Because the formal rulebook, it's literally never enough on its own.
Here's how we're going to map out this architecture today. We'll start with the unwritten rules. Then we'll look at incentives and power dynamics. After that, we'll track the breakdown loop, check out counter strategies for stability, and finally, we'll zoom out beyond politics to look at universal systems.
All right, Section 1. The unwritten rules, the invisible shield. Let's see how this forms the absolute foundation of governance. So think of this as a core dichotomy. On one side, you have the formal constitution. These are the hard rules, the absolute boundaries of what you technically can do. But balancing that out, you have informal norms. These are the soft constraints dictating what you will do. It's like the written law tells you exactly where the edge of the cliff is, but the unwritten norms are that internal compass that keeps you from actually driving right up to the edge. What's really fascinating here is that the first pillar of this stability, mutual toleration, relies entirely on a shared state of mind. It's this unwritten rule of just accepting competing political actors as legitimate participants. It means looking at your opponents and recognizing that, yeah, we completely disagree, but you still have a fundamental right to be here and compete. Without that baseline assumption, the entire structure just starts to wobble. Then we have the second pillar, which takes immense self-control. Institutional forbearance. This is the deliberate choice to not use your full legal power to its extreme limit. You're intentionally leaving legally available weapons right there on the table so you don't destroy the system itself. It's the idea that just because you have the legal right to do something doesn't actually mean you should. You're choosing to leave your strongest weapon in its sheath.
Moving on to Section 2, incentives and power dynamics, pushing the envelope. Let's see what happens when testing those boundaries becomes the norm.
Human nature being what it is, political actors naturally want maximum advantage, right? So they constantly seek loopholes. The strongest actors learn to exploit legal limits while still totally appearing like they're playing by the rules. It creates this very tricky, legal but controversial gray area. They're technically following the letter of the law, sure, but they are actively chipping away at that spirit of restraint we just talked about.
And this erosion, it's powered by a pretty dangerous psychological shift. It all starts with how we frame things morally. Opponents go from being viewed as legitimate rivals to being viewed as existential threats. And once that psychological underlayer shifts, man, the whole game changes. The expectation of reciprocity just vanishes. If your opponent is a literal threat to your existence, restraint is completely removed. People feel totally justified taking the gloves off.
Which brings us to Section 3, the breakdown loop, anatomy of a collapse. Let's trace the exact mechanics of this unraveling.
This feedback loop shows us exactly how a single violation spirals out of control. It's incredibly predictable, actually. Step 1, someone crosses a line and violates a norm. Naturally, Step 2, the other side retaliates and strikes back even harder. Instantly, at Step 3, we see reduced trust. Then, Step 4, total escalation. Retaliatory violations become the new normal until finally, Step 5, you hit system collapse. It's literally like pouring gasoline on a fire.
And what makes this so incredibly dangerous is that it isn't just about a few bad apples. It's structurally driven. Modern systems act like accelerants. We're talking intense electoral competition, deep ideological polarization, and media ecosystems that actively reward maximalist legal exploitation. The environment itself is practically begging actors to push legal boundaries to their absolute breaking point.
When the system degrades like this, it basically mutates. You start out with reciprocated expectations, that mutual trust and self-limitation, but then it shifts into what we call adversarial legalism. This is where laws are no longer guidelines for a functioning society. They become aggressive institutional weapons used exclusively to neutralize your opponents.
Okay, so Section 4. Counter strategies for stability. Saving the system. How do we actually halt this breakdown loop? To actually save the system, actors have to make the active choice to play defense. We call this the system defense logic. It requires stepping back from the brink. You have to maintain mutual recognition of legitimacy, totally avoid maximal exploitation of your legal authority, and you have to preserve restraint, even when you are legally allowed to act. By intentionally keeping your legal weapon sheathed, you start to reinforce that crucial expectation of future cooperation.
Finally, Section 5. Beyond politics, universal systems. Let's see how this framework goes way, way beyond just governance.
It turns out the exact same dynamics of restraint govern incredibly diverse fields. Think about it. If you look at trading systems, when Wall Street aggressively exploits every loophole, the result is systemic market volatility. In chess, if you overexploit a tactical edge, you trigger a long-term structural collapse. Cybersecurity, maximalist exploitation leads to a total collapse of system integrity. And geopolitics just turns into endless escalation spirals. Across the board, if you remove those unwritten boundaries, the whole structure just breaks. Which brings us to this incredible quote. Law defines what is possible. Norms define what is sustainable. This universal truth perfectly captures everything we've talked about in this explainer. Written rules alone can never save a system if the participants lose their shared commitment to informal self-restraint. The law just tells you the absolute limits of possibility, but the norms, they dictate whether your system is actually sustainable enough to survive.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. When legal possibility becomes indistinguishable from acceptable behavior, how long can your system really survive? Keep that in the back of your mind the next time you watch any competitive system operate. You'll start seeing these unwritten rules hiding right in plain sight. Thanks so much for exploring this with us today.